Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the secret lives of our favorite fictional characters. You think you know everything about Superman, Spider-Man, and the rest? Well, think again. We've dug up some of the most incredible, mind-blowing, and downright bizarre facts that you probably never heard before. So grab your popcorn, get comfortable, and prepare to have your mind blown. Let's get started. First up, let's talk about the Man of Steel himself, Superman. We all know him as the ultimate symbol of truth, justice, and the American way, right? But did you know that originally Superman was conceived as a villain? That's right. In their very first story from 1933, The Reign of the Superman, creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster imagined a bald telepathic villain bent on world domination. It was a complete flop. Thankfully, they went back to the drawing board and reimagined him as the hero we know and love today. Can you imagine a world where Superman was the bad guy? It's a crazy thought. And here's another little tidbit about Supes. You know his iconic S shield, right? For decades, everyone just assumed it stood for Superman. It makes sense. But in the 2003 comic series, Superman Birthright, it was reckoned to be the Kryptonian symbol for hope. This idea was so popular that it was carried over into the movies like Man of Steel. So next time you see that symbol, that it was so popular that it was carried over into the movies like Man of Steel over into the movies like Man of Steel. So next time you see that symbol, remember it's not just an initial, it's a universal sign of hope. Pretty cool, huh? All right, let's swing over to the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Peter Parker's story is classic. Bitten by a radioactive spider. Gets powers, great power, great responsibility. You know the drill. But did you know that Stan Lee originally had a tough time getting Spider-Man approved? His publisher, Martin Goodman, hated the idea. He thought people would be repulsed by a hero based on a spider, and that a teenager as the main character was a terrible idea because teens are supposed to be sidekicks. Stan Lee managed to sneak Spider-Man's first appearance into the final issue of a canceled anthology series called Amazing Fantasy. To everyone's surprise, that issue became a bestseller, and the rest is history. Talk about a lucky break! And how about those web shooters? In most of the classic comics, Peter Parker isn't just super strong and agile. He's also a genius who invents his own web fluid and the mechanical devices to shoot it. This was a deliberate choice to emphasize his intelligence and resourcefulness. It wasn't until Sam Raimi's 2002 movie that the idea of organic web shooters, where the webs come directly from his body, became mainstream. Fans were divided on this change, but you have to admit it streamlined his powers for the big screen. Which do you prefer, mechanical or organic? Let me know in the comments. Next, let's journey to a galaxy far, far away and talk about Yoda. The wise, green, 900-year-old Jedi Master is one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. But what species is he? The answer is nobody knows. George Lucas has intentionally kept Yoda's species and home planet a complete secret. He once joked that Yoda is the illegitimate love child of Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, but in reality, he's just Yoda's species. The only other known member of this species is Yaddle, who briefly appeared on the Jedi Council in The Phantom Menace. This mystery just adds to his mystique, making him an even more fascinating character. Also, the original design for Yoda was very different. Early concept art showed him looking more like a small, gnome-like creature, sometimes with a tall, pointy hat. The final puppet, designed by Stuart Freeborn, was a work of genius. Freeborn famously based Yoda's face partially on his own and partially on Albert Einstein to give him that look of wisdom and intelligence. And it worked! Yoda's design is timeless and instantly recognizable. Okay, from the far reaches of space to the dark streets of Gotham City, let's talk about Batman. The Dark Knight is known for his strict no-kill rule. It's a core part of his identity. But in his earliest comic book appearances in the late 1930s, Batman had no problem with lethal force. He carried a gun and didn't hesitate to use it, even tossing villains into vats of acid. It wasn't until the introduction of Robin that the editors decided to soften his image and establish his now famous moral code. They wanted a more family-friendly hero, and the gun-toting vigilante had to go. It's hard to imagine Batman that way now, isn't it? And what about his loyal butler, Alfred Pennyworth? We know him as Bruce Wayne's confidant, medic, and father figure. But when he was first introduced in 1943, he was an overweight, bumbling aspiring detective named Alfred Beagle, who just showed up at Wayne Manor wanting to help. He even accidentally discovered their secret identities. It took several retcons and redesigns over the years to evolve him into the suave, ex-Special Forces, and highly capable Alfred we see today. He went from comic relief to the emotional heart of the Batman story. Let's switch gears and head over to the world of animation. Did you know that the voice of Bugs Bunny, Mel Blanc, had a clause in his contract that required his tombstone to read, "That's all, folks." And it does. You can go see it. Blanc was a voice acting legend, bringing to life not just Bugs, but Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Sylvester, and hundreds of other characters. During a serious car accident in 1961 that left him in a coma, doctors struggled to get a response from him. Finally, one doctor had an idea and asked, "Bugs Bunny, can you hear me?" In a weak voice, Mel Blanc responded, "What's up, Doc?" It was the first thing he'd said, proving just how deeply connected he was to his characters. Now for a character beloved by kids and adults alike, Winnie the Pooh. The real-life story behind Pooh is just as heartwarming as the books. He was named after a real black bear at the London Zoo named Winnie, who was the mascot for a Canadian Army regiment. The Pooh part came from a swan that the author, Agnon, and his son Christopher Robin had met on holiday. Christopher Robin was so fond of Winnie the bear that he named his own teddy bear after her. And so, the world was gifted with the adventures of Winnie the Pooh and his friends in the 100-Acre Wood, which was based on a real forest near Millen's home. Let's dive into the world of video games with a true icon. Mario. We all know him as the Italian plumber who saves Princess Peach from the clutches of Bowser. But he wasn't always a plumber, and he wasn't always named Mario. In his very first appearance in the 1981 arcade game, Donkey Kong, he was a carpenter. And his name was Jumpman. He was only named Mario later in honor of Mario Segale, the landlord of Nintendo of America's warehouse, who apparently bore a resemblance to the character. And his profession was changed to plumber because so many of the game Mario Brothers levels were set in underground pipes. And here's a fun fact about his look. Why does he have a mustache, a hat, and overalls? It was all due to the graphical limitations of 1980s arcade hardware. The mustache was easier to draw and more distinct than a mouth. The hat was there because drawing hair that moved realistically was too difficult. And the overalls made his arm movements more visible against his body, so you could clearly see him running and jumping. These practical design choices accidentally created one of the most recognizable characters in the world. From video games to fantasy literature, let's talk about Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien was a master world builder, and his characters were deeply thought out. The name Gandalf actually comes from Old Norse and means elf of the wand, or wand elf. Tolkien originally gave this name to the leader of the dwarves, who would later become Thorin Oakenshield. The wizard character was initially named Bladderthin. Tolkien eventually swapped the names because he felt Gandalf had a more powerful and wizardly sound to it. Can you imagine Thorin being called Gandalf? It just doesn't feel right. We've covered a lot of ground, but there are so many more secrets to uncover. How about James Bond? Author Ian Fleming named his super spy after a real-life American ornithologist, a birdwatcher. Fleming wanted a name that was dull and interesting, the most plain name he could find, because he felt the exciting things would happen to and around Bond, not because of him. He found the perfect name on the cover of a birdwatching guide called Birds of the West, Indies by a man named James Bond. And so, an icon was born from a desire for total blandness. And one final curiosity before we wrap up. Let's talk about Sherlock Holmes. He's the most portrayed literary character in film and television history. But the iconic deerstalker hat and curved pipe? They were never explicitly mentioned by Arthur Conan Doyle in the original stories. The hat was an addition by the original illustrator Sidney Paget, who wore one himself when he went to the countryside. The curved pipe was popularized by actor William Gillette in his stage plays, supposedly because it was easier to speak his lines with a curved pipe in his mouth than a straight one. These little details, added by others, have become inseparable from our image of the great detective. And that's our deep dive into the incredible curiosities of famous characters. It's amazing to think about how many of the things we take for granted about these icons were the result of accidents, last-minute changes, or pure chance. From villainous origins to practical design choices, their stories are just as fascinating as the adventures they have. What was the most surprising fact you learned today? And are there any characters you want us to investigate next? Let me know down in the comments. I love reading your suggestions. If you enjoyed this journey into the secret history of fiction, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content just like this. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.